So what I left you with the challenge is to change this paragraph to being super long, but don't actually create some CSS for it, but use jQuery to make it scrollable and a certain height and width. So I'm going to use lorem ipsum text. So lorem ipsum lipsum.com is a quick way to do this. And I'm going to just put in 20 paragraphs. I'm going to generate it. And we're just going to go ahead and copy this out. I'm going to place it in this paragraph tag. I'm not really worried about adding in paragraph lines all throughout this. And I'm actually not going to keep this code long term. I just want to show you how we're going to do this. So I save it and I refresh in here. All right, so I've got all of this text here. What I want to do is put it into a container that is a certain size, and I want it to be scrollable. So what I would do is I could either add an ID or a class. Let's say, for instance, we add this as a class that we're going to probably use over and over again, and I'll just call it a description class, right? So now into my actual jQuery code, not inside the timeout. I'm not going to really worry about the transformation of it. Instead, I'm going to put it in here. And now I've got this selector of description. Well, what if I want to reuse this selector over and over again? Sure, I could copy and paste it, or I can make it into a variable like this. Okay, so this is often a notation you'll see for jQuery. Now, JavaScript and jQuery variables or variables in JavaScript, you have to declare var. That is a difference than saying in Python, description equals to something. Like this is how you would do it in Python. This is how you do it in jQuery and JavaScript. This is actually JavaScript right here. And then the $sign in front of it is just giving us the notation that, hey, this is likely going to be jQuery. There are other JavaScript libraries that use this notation. So you can also say var without the $sign. But anyways, this allows us to reuse it. So now that we've got this variable, we wanted to give it a CSS of a height, right? So let's go ahead and give it the height of, let's say 300 pixels. I also want to give it a width. So I'll just say, not height, but width equals to 250 pixels. Okay, so we now have a way to select it and then a way to reuse that selector by using a variable. So I save that and I refresh in here, and the top stuff doesn't change, but our now height and width does. This is cool. But of course, you probably already know, hey, if I go back into my CSS, I can do that same thing. And this is actually probably where you would put that. You would actually want it to be in that same, you'd want this to be in CSS. You wouldn't want to put this into jQuery because it's really just not necessary. So you'd say width equals to that 250 pixels and then height 300 pixels, right? Okay, so we'll save that. And since I played around with it and I can see it now in jQuery, I can go ahead and change that, refresh, and it's still the same. But what I want to do is inside of my description, I want to see if I can actually test the actual height of it. So I'm going to use this thing called console log. And it's very similar to like the print statement in Python, but it logs it to the console, which we'll see in a second. I'm going to grab that selector and do length. I'll do that one. And I'll also do .css height. Okay, we'll explain these two in just a second. So let's refresh in here, and I want to open up the JavaScript console. A shortcut to do it is Command Alt J or Command Shift J. I also could come in here and go to, I think it's it's View, Developer, and JavaScript Console. Most browsers will have that, so even if you're not using Chrome, there is likely a developer way to see the console. So jumping in the console, I see that 1 and 300 pics, right? So this is showing me that length, that means it actually exists. That means there's actually something in there. Let's say, for instance, we change this to description 2. I refresh. Now I get 0 and undefined. So 1 is a good thing. This means that if if 1 then exists. In this case, right? So that just is saying that, hey, this actual selector exists on this page. Otherwise, it does not exist. And this gives me the actual CSS height of that element. But of course, that is just the CSS value of that height. It's not an actual integer. So we can also do this to an integer, right? So we can do dot height, and that will give us the actual integer value of that height. But this is way bigger than 300, right? Way, way bigger. Okay, so this means that we have to change how this is going to be done a little bit, right? What I'm saying is I want to make sure that if my actual height, so if the actual height of the description or whatever's in there, if it's greater than a certain value, I want to add a CSS element of overflow scroll. So basically I want to say this: if greater than height or current height, let's say current element height is greater than the built-in height, then add something like CSS overflow scroll. So that property. Now, of course, this property already works well in this sense when this happens. But what I want to do is show you how we could go about accomplishing it on our own. So to get the actual element height is going to be a little tricky. The reason it's a little tricky has to do with our selector. So if I scroll up a little bit and make a new paragraph tag with a new selector and say another paragraph, what is going to happen here, right? So we have two classes with description as the class, or two paragraphs with description as the class. They're different sizes. I refresh in here. I see that another paragraph is showing up. I scroll down and I see this other one. But now our length is 2, right? And then we have 300 and 300. So what's happening here is our console log length is 2. It's no longer 1. Well, that's because we actually have 2 elements that are this description. So to get one of those elements, we have to think of it in terms of an array, JavaScript array. Let's actually look at how arrays work in the next one to see what I mean by that and how this is actually treated as an array. Stay with us.